She was traded to him as a prize, unaware he would be the first man to see past her face. The morning she arrived at Ashenvale, my counsel told me she was the most beautiful woman in 7 kingdoms. Lord Brennan of Thornville had written it in the letter himself, as though it were a credential, as though he were sending me a sword with a particularly fine blade. She's without equal in grace and form, he wrote, and I give her to you gladly as a sign of the bond between our packs. I had read that letter 3 times, and each time I had felt something cold and uneasy settle in my chest that I could not name, and had set it aside. I met her in the entry hall of Ashenvale Keep, where the river-gray stone was lit in the thin autumn light that came through the high windows, and my wolves lay along the walls watching the door the way they watched everything new, steadily, without fear or welcome. She came in ahead of her escort. She did not sweep or drift or perform an entrance. She walked, simply walked, and looked at the hall with the eyes of someone who was cataloging it, not admiring it. Her cloak was dark green, travel-worn. Her face was, my counsel had not exaggerated. No one ever did, I would later learn, and I found, to my own confusion, that I could not hold my gaze on it for long without feeling something go uncomfortably still inside me. And so I looked instead at her hands, which were clasped in front of her, and at the way she held her shoulders, which was the way a person holds their shoulders when they have been carrying something heavy for a very long time and have made peace with the weight. Alpha King, she bowed, the correct depth, the correct duration. Welcome to Draenmore, I said. She looked at me then, direct, measuring without performance, and said, thank you, and nothing else. My wolf moved. Not a surge, not the howl of recognition I had heard other Alpha Kings describe. Something quieter, a shift, a sudden attention, the way a wolf will go still at the edge of a tree line, ears forward, before it has decided what it has heard. I ignored it. I was very practiced at ignoring things I could not explain. My counsel was delighted with her. Counselor Petra said she would make an excellent figure at official gatherings. Counselor Hawthorne said her connection to Thornville would smooth the northern trade disputes. Old Wren, who had served my father and cared nothing for beauty or politics, said nothing at all and watched her from the corner of his eyes in the way he watched things he was not yet sure of. The keep watched her too. The servants glanced and then looked away and then glanced again. The pack members stationed at Ashenvale found reasons to be in whatever room she was entering. I watched this happen, watched the wake of attention she moved through everywhere she went, and I watched her notice it and not change. She did not become more gracious or more guarded when she was watched. She simply continued whatever she was doing. It was, I realized, because she had been doing this her entire life, and she had learned, had been forced to learn, to live inside it as though it were weather. On the 3rd day, I found her in the East Hall, standing at the window that faced the Calder River. She was not looking at the view. She was holding a book against her side and reading a passage from the memorial stone that was set into the wall, the record of my grandmother's founding of this keep, carved in the old Draenmore script that very few people still bothered to learn. I had not heard her come in. She had not heard me stop in the doorway. She read the passage quietly aloud to herself, not performing, just thinking through it, and then she said to no one in a tone of mild private interest, she started building in winter. That's strange. No one starts a stone keep in winter. Then she turned and saw me. She did not flush or apologize for being found in a room she had every right to be in. She simply looked at me with that steady, measuring gaze and waited. She started in winter, I said, because she didn't want the pack to have time to argue her out of it. If the foundations were already in the ground before the thaw, the argument was over. Something shifted in her face, not warmth exactly, more like recognition, as though I had said something that matched a thought she'd already had. That's very practical, she said. She was a practical woman. And stubborn, Elowen said. Those are sometimes the same thing. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement of one. She dipped her head slightly and left the room, and I stood there for a long moment after she was gone, listening to my wolf circle slowly in my chest, and told myself I had simply had a conversation with a guest. Her name was Elowen. I had known this from the letter, but it took me some days to begin thinking of her by it, because the letter had called her the gift and the prize and the jewel of Thornville with such insistence that those words had taken up residence first, the way any word will if it is repeated enough times. I began to notice things. This was, I told myself, simply attention, The attention any alpha king must pay to a person newly arrived in his keep, a political arrangement he was responsible for, a situation with consequences. I was being thorough. I noticed that she rose before the rest of the keep and walked the eastern passage alone, where the windows showed the river. I noticed that she ate small amounts of everything offered to her, not from delicacy or performance, but with the practiced economy of someone who had learned not to express preference because preference was something that could be taken away. I noticed that she spoke less in rooms with more people in them, and more quiet, precise observations, never more than a sentence or two, in rooms where she was nearly alone. I noticed that she could not abide the smell of the yellow candles that Ashenvale burned in the East Hall. She never said so. She simply, every time she entered that hall, moved to the side of the room furthest from the candles and breathed through her mouth until she adjusted. No one else noticed. I noticed because I had begun, without deciding to watch where she positioned herself in every room. I noticed that my wolves, who came and went through the great hall at their own discretion and were not interested in the approval of humans, had begun to follow her. Not urgently, not with the devotion they showed me, but steadily the way water will find a low place, they oriented toward her. The gray female who had never cared for any person other than myself lay across Alohan's feet one morning at the window seat and went to sleep there, and Alohan looked down at her with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Something unguarded and a little wondering, as though she had been given something she had not known to want. I watched this from the doorway. I did not go in. My wolf was no longer simply circling. It had sat down. It was watching Alohan the way it watched things it had decided about. I had not decided anything. I reminded myself of this firmly every morning when I lay awake in the hour before dawn and thought about an unguarded expression and a woman who spoke to the memorial stone of my grandmother. The arrangement between Thornville and Draenmore was not, technically, a marriage. It was an alliance formalized by her presence in my house, what my council called a bond offering, which was a phrase so old it had outlasted its own meaning, and which meant in the plainest terms that Lord Brennan of Thornville had given me something valuable to secure my goodwill, and expected me to acknowledge that value. The expectation of the court, the expectation of both packs, was that I would in time make it a marriage, that this was what she was here for. No one had asked her. I knew this because I had begun to think about it. The letter had come to me. The arrangements had been made between myself and Brennan. Alohan had been informed, not consulted, and had arrived. I understood this now, looking back at the set of her shoulders that first morning, having made peace with it the same way she had made peace with everything else. Not with happiness, with endurance. This sat in me like a stone. I had agreed to the arrangement because I had needed the northern trade routes that Thornville controlled, and because I had believed, when I read the letter, that a woman sent willingly as a political gift was a woman who understood the arrangement and accepted it. I was beginning to understand that willingness and absence of refusal were two different things, and that I had not thought carefully enough about which one Brennan had actually offered me. I could not undo the arrangement without insulting Thornville and unraveling 3 months of delicate negotiation. I could, however. It occurred to me slowly over several days, the way the most important decisions always occurred to me, decide what kind of arrangement I was actually going to make. I went to find her. She was in the library. The real library, the old one on the north side of the keep, where the books were in poor condition and the heating was unreliable, and no one went any more because the rebuilt East Library had better furniture and more light. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the shelves, her knees drawn up, reading one of the old histories with the careful deliberateness of someone working through a language they were not entirely fluent in. She looked up when I came in, waited. "You read the old script," I said. "Slowly," she said. "I learned from a woman in Thornville who had learned it from her grandmother. I'm sure I'm making errors. You were correct about my grandmother starting the foundations in winter." She considered this. "I thought I might be, but I wasn't certain." She looked back at the book. "There are 3 different accounts of when she began. I'm trying to find which one the stone in the hall was taken from." I sat down in the chair across from her, which was dusty and slightly too low for me. She did not comment on this. She went back to reading. I stayed. I was not certain why. I had come to say something specific, and now that I was here I found the words had rearranged themselves, and I needed a moment to find them again. The fire in the North Library's small hearth was low. Outside, the Calder ran dark and cold between the birch trees. "Is there anything you need," I said eventually, "that you have not been given?" She looked up again, considered the question with more seriousness than the routine courtesy it might have been. "The candles in the East Hall," she said finally. "The yellow ones, if they could be replaced with white or with none." I looked at her. She had not told anyone. She had simply endured them for 2 weeks quietly every day. "I'll have it done tomorrow morning," I said. Something in her face went very still, not the closed stillness she usually wore. A different kind, the stillness of someone who has received something unexpected and doesn't know yet how to hold it. Thank you," she said. I went back to my chambers. I had my steward change the candles that night. The month of Ashenvale's autumn is the gray month. The birches lose their leaves, the river runs silver, the sky is the color of old pewter from dawn to dusk, and the air smells of cold stone and wood smoke. It is not a comfortable month. I have always loved it. I began to spend more time in the North Library. I told myself this was because I had neglected the old histories. I had, in fact, neglected the old histories, so this was not a lie exactly. It was simply not the whole truth. Elowen was usually there. Sometimes she was reading. Sometimes she was making notes, careful, small handwriting in a leather-bound book she carried. And sometimes she was simply sitting with the gray wolf's head in her lap and looking at the fire. On the days she did that, I would work at the table across from her, and we would be quiet together, which was a thing I had not done with another person in a very long time, and which I had not known I missed. She began to speak more in those sessions. Not to fill the silence, she had no impulse to fill silences, which was one of the things about her that undid me slowly without my consent, but when she had a thought worth saying, she said it. A sharp observation about something in whatever she was reading. A question about Draenmore's history. Once, a very dry comment about the architectural decision to put the library's only good window on the north wall, where it faced nothing but the birch grove and got no afternoon sun. "Whoever planned this room," she said, not looking up from her book, "hated readers." "My grandfather," I said. "He considered reading a vice." She looked up. "And yet he built a library." "My grandmother required it." That almost smile again. "She sounds formidable." He was also formidable. They were very well matched. Elowen looked back at her book. After a moment she said quietly, without particular emphasis, "Formidable people must be difficult to be with." "I think," I said carefully, "that they found it easier with each other than they would have with anyone who was less." She didn't respond to that, but she stayed. I sat across from her for another hour, turning pages I was not reading, and my wolf sat beside my heart as though it had been there always, and the fire burned down, and neither of us moved to leave. My council had a meeting in the second week of the gray month, and I was not invited. This was not unusual. There were things my council did without me, procedural matters, correspondence they drafted in my name. I trusted them to handle the machinery of the keep within the bounds I had set. What was unusual was what old Wren told me afterward, quietly, in the corridor outside the great hall, with the expression he wore when he was troubled. "They've been corresponding with Brennan," he said. I stopped walking. "About what?" "The arrangement. There is a pact to the west, the Korath Pact, that is pressing for a similar alliance. Hawthorne believes that Lady Elowen might serve as a stronger bond offering for Korath, given the territorial interests involved. More valuable there, he said, than here." Old Wren paused. "He has drafted a letter to Brennan proposing the transfer." I heard this from a great distance, the way you hear things when something in you has gone very cold and very quiet. "Has it been sent?" "Not yet. He planned to bring it to you for approval tomorrow." "He won't need to," I said. Old Wren looked at me for a moment, and then he said, "No, I didn't think so." I went to my chambers and stood at the window and looked at the Calder River for a long time. The birches were stripped bare now, silver-white against the gray sky, and the river was dark and fast. And somewhere in the keep Elowen did not know that my council had just treated her again, as a token to be moved from one hand to another. She would not be surprised. That was the thing that sat in me the most heavily. She would not be surprised. She had been treated this way her whole life by everyone, and she had made peace with it because she'd had no other choice. And she was perfectly, achingly aware that being here in Ashenvale was simply the latest iteration of the same transaction. And she was preparing, I understood suddenly, with a clarity that knocked the air from my lungs. She was preparing for it to happen again. She had not let herself settle. She had been careful, the whole time she had been here, not to let herself want anything too much, or trust anything too fully, because she knew, she had always known, that she could be moved again at any moment, and the cost of hope was the cost of having it taken. The candles, she had asked for the candles. That had surprised her that the request had been granted. Something that small had surprised her. I went to find her. She was not in the library. She was not at the window in the eastern passage. I walked the keep with a control I was keeping with some effort, my wolf close to the surface now, not aggressive but insistent. Present in a way it had not been in many years, since before I took the seat and learned to hold myself still. I found her in her chambers, which surprised me, because she was never there in the afternoon. She found the room too enclosed, I thought, though she had never said so. She was standing at the window with a small traveling pack set on the table behind her, which was not fully assembled but which she had begun. She heard me knock, turned, looked at me. "I'm not leaving yet," she said with a careful neutrality. "I only thought it might be sensible to." "You're not leaving," I said. A pause, Alpha King. "Calder," I said. "My name is Calder." I wasn't sure why that was the first thing out of my mouth. It seemed suddenly important. "I need you to know my name is Calder before I say anything else." She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her face shifted, very small, very careful. But I had spent 2 months watching that face with more attention than I had ever paid to anything, and I saw it. A question she was not asking, an opening the size of a thread. "I know what Hawthorne proposed," I said. "To Brennan it has not been sent and it will not be sent. I have dissolved the proposal. You are not going to Korath. You are not going anywhere." I stopped, steadied myself. "That is, if you wish to stay. I'm telling you what I want, not what you have to do." Elowen stared at me. I watched the stillness in her face, that perfect practice stillness, and I watched it crack just slightly, just at the edges, the way ice cracks before it goes. "What you want," she said. "Yes." "No one has ever," she stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "Why?" This was the question. I had been asking myself a version of it for 2 months, and I had the answer now, had had it for some time, but saying it aloud to her was a different thing from holding it alone. I took a breath. "Because you told no one about the candles," I said. "Because you read the memorial stone aloud to yourself because you were curious, not because anyone was watching. Because you think my grandmother was practical and stubborn and probably right, and you said so to the wall before you said it to me. Because in 2 months in this keep, in a place that has watched you every single day as though you were something to be admired or assessed or moved elsewhere, you have not once behaved differently in a room with people in it than you have in a room alone. Because you speak to my wolves as though they are company, and they have decided you are right." I stopped. "Because I have not been thinking about your face. I haven't been thinking about it at all. I have been thinking about you." The silence in the room was absolute. My wolf pressed against the inside of my ribs, not urgently, quietly, the way it had sat in the North Library all those weeks, as though it had known long before I did and had simply been waiting for me to catch up. The bond was here. It had been here, building in the slow gray weeks of the Ashenvale autumn, not in a moment of thunder and recognition, but in a library, in the light from a badly placed window, in the smell of old books and cold stone, and the sound of her voice working through a language she had learned from a woman who had learned it from her grandmother. Elowen crossed the room. She stopped in front of me, very close. She looked up at me with those steady, measuring eyes, and I could see in them, for the first time I had ever seen it, that she was not calculating, not enduring, not preparing. She was simply there. "Calder," she said, "my name," the first time she had used it. The bond ignited. Not like fire, like the moment after fire, when the whole room is warm and the light is even and you understand that this is what warmth actually is. It moved through my chest and into my hands and settled in my bones, and my wolf made a sound low in its throat that was not a howl but was close to one, a sound of arrival, of something that had been waiting a long time finally ceasing to wait. I reached out and covered her hand with mine. She let me, and then carefully, the way she did everything, she turned her hand over and held on. We did not speak for a long time after that. We stood at the window of her chambers while the Calder River ran gray and fast in the birch wood below, and the light shifted from afternoon to the first blue edge of dusk, and my wolf lay quiet and full in my chest for the first time I could remember. She stood beside me with her hand in mine, and she was not performing stillness anymore. She was simply still, the way a person is still when they have, for the first time, know where they are being sent. Eventually, she said, quietly, "I don't know what this is supposed to look like." "Neither do I," said. "I've never had a fated mate before." A pause. "You're certain that's what this is?" "My wolf has been sitting at your feet for 2 months," I said. "I think it knew before either of us." She looked down and the almost smile came, and this time it became an actual smile, small and private and real, the first real smile I had seen from her, the one she had been keeping somewhere behind that years-long stillness. It was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen, not because of what her face did when she smiled, though that was considerable, but because she was not doing it for anyone. She was doing it because she meant it. "The gray wolf," she said. "Her name is Cree," I said. "She has not slept on anyone's feet in the 8 years I have known her." "She's very warm," Elowen said. And then, after a moment, "I noticed when she did it the first time that I was glad, which surprised me. I had learned not to be glad about things, generally, because—" She stopped. "Because," I said carefully, "they have usually been taken away." "Yes, very quiet." "I'm not going to take it away," I said. "I'm not going to take anything away. I'm asking you if you're willing to stay, on your terms, in your time. I'm not Lord Brennan. I'm not Korath. I'm not going to write a letter and negotiate your worth in trade routes." I paused. "I want you here because you are you. The person in the North Library who is reading the old histories, slowly, and making notes in small handwriting, and is too polite to tell me that I put the table too close to the cold wall." Elowen looked at me. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she said, "The table is too close to the cold wall. I'll have it moved." "And the window," she said. "If it's possible, it would get light in the afternoon if it faced." "I'll have it rebuilt," I said. She stared at me. "It's a wall," I said. "Walls can be moved. My grandmother started building a stone keep in winter because she didn't want anyone to argue her out of it. I think she would approve of rebuilding a wall for a better window." Elowen looked at me for another long moment, and then she laughed, a real one, brief and surprised out of her, the kind of laugh that has been held in for a long time and comes out when it is finally safe. She pressed her free hand to her mouth immediately, as though she was not certain it was permitted. "You're allowed," I said very quietly. She lowered her hand. Her eyes were bright. She said I would like to stay. I brought her before the court in the 3rd week of the gray month, on a morning when the sky had cleared for the first time in weeks, and the birch wood burned white against a pale, cold blue, and the Calder ran silver and fast, and the great hall of Ashenvale was full of the people of Draenmore and the envoy Lord Brennan had sent. His nephew, a careful-faced young man who had arrived 2 days prior and who stood now near the back of the hall with an expression I recognized. Calculating, waiting to see which way things fell so he could report correctly. I had not told my council what I was going to do. I had told old Wren, who had looked at me for a long moment and then said, in the tone he used for things he had decided he was glad about, "Yes." "Right." Elowen came in beside me, not behind me, beside me. She wore the deep green, her own, not anything the keep had provided her, because I had asked her what she wanted to wear and she had said the green was hers and I had said then wear it. Her shoulders were level. Her face was composed, and behind the composure, because I knew now where to look, there was something else. A settled quality, a groundedness that had not been there when she arrived. She had slept in the previous nights the way people sleep, when they are not waiting for something to be taken. My wolf walked beside my heart, easy and content. I took her hand. The hall was quiet in the way halls go quiet when they understand something is happening. "Draenmore," I said, and my voice carried to the stone. "I stand before you with my fated mate. The bond between us is declared and acknowledged before the pack, before this court, before every alliance and every envoy in this room." I looked at Brennan's nephew. "The bond offering from Thornville is no longer a political arrangement. Elowen of Thornville is my chosen mate, my declared Luna of Draenmore. She is not a gift. She was never a gift. She is herself." I turned to her, and she has agreed. The hall was absolutely still. Then Cree, the gray wolf, who had padded in and taken up a position at Elowen's left side without anyone stopping her, because Cree had never needed permission, sat down and pressed her head against Elowen's hand, and something moved through the pack in the hall. A ripple, a recognition, the way a pack knows things before people do, and the bowing began. It started with old Wren, which surprised no one who knew him. Then the guards. Then the court, one by one, until the whole hall had dipped, not the practiced courtesy bow of ceremony, but the deep bow of acknowledgement, the bow that means we see you and we receive you, and Brennan's nephew bowed last, his calculating face gone blank with something he had not prepared for. Elowen stood very still beside me. Her hand in mine held tightly. "You're allowed," I said, very quietly, only for her. She pressed her lips together, and her eyes were bright, and she held on. In the weeks after the declaration, the letters came from Thornville, from Korath, from 3 other packs who had heard what had happened and were recalibrating their understanding of Draenmore's politics and of my Luna's standing in it. Brennan's letter was careful and correct, and said nothing about the arrangements he had proposed or the letter Hawthorne had drafted, because Brennan was a practical man and understood that the time for that conversation was over. Korath's letter congratulated me and said nothing else. The 3 other packs' letters were more effusive, and I replied to all of them briefly and to the point. Elowen read some of the letters. I had not asked her to. I had begun simply leaving them on the table in the library when I had dealt with them, and she had begun picking them up, and now we moved through the keep's correspondence together in the mornings in the North Library, where the wall had been rebuilt and the window now faced southwest, and the light came in gold and full every afternoon until dusk. She had strong opinions about the correspondence. She kept them largely to herself in the first weeks, offering observations only when asked, which I remedied by asking frequently. By the second month she was offering them without being asked, in the dry, precise way she had, 1 sentence, rarely 2, always exactly enough. I began relying on them. I could not have said when that had happened, the shift from consulting to relying, except that it was the same kind of shift as everything with Elowen. It happened quietly under the surface, and by the time I noticed it, it had already been true for some time. Cree stayed at her feet. The other wolves began to follow. She learned the keep, not the official paths, the corridors people used when they were being seen, but the real ones, the servants' passages and the storeroom routes, and the way through the east courtyard that avoided the afternoon wind. She learned the names of everyone in the keep, not from any desire to perform warmth, but because she was genuinely curious about people, which I was coming to understand was not something anyone had ever noticed about her before because they had never looked past her face long enough to see it. She began to teach the old script to Brennan's nephew, who had stayed in Draenmore at his lord's request to serve as Thornville's resident envoy, and who turned out to be quietly scholarly and entirely wasted in a political role, and who received this gift with the helpless gratitude of someone given water in a long drought. I watched this from across the hall one afternoon, the 2 of them bent over a text from the North Library, Elowen pointing out a character with the patience of someone who had been taught with patience, and I thought about the woman who had taught her from her grandmother's knowledge, and about what is passed from hand to hand in the keeping of things. I will tell you what the bond is, now that I have had time to understand it. It is not the thing I had expected. I had grown up hearing the stories, the thunder and the recognition, the mark blazing to life, the wolf surging, the knowing instant. And some of that is true. The bond has its own current, its own warmth, the way it moves through me when she is near and settles when we are in the same room and pulls very slightly like a river's pull when we are separated for more than a day. My wolf is not the wolf it was before her. It is more itself somehow, fuller. But the bond, I know, is not a single moment. It is the ongoing choice of it. It is every morning in the North Library when she looks up from whatever she is reading and tells me something she has thought about, and I put down my letters to listen. It is the way she has learned that I will move the wall and change the candles and ask what she wants, and has begun, slowly, carefully, like a door opening on a hinge that has been frozen, to want things, to say them, to believe they will not be taken. It is the evening in the 5th week when she came into my study and sat down across from me without any pretense of having a reason and said, "I just wanted to be here." And I said, "Good," and went back to my work. And she read for 2 hours in the chair by the hearth, and that was all, and it was the most content I had ever been in that room. It is the morning I found her sitting on the floor of the library with Cree pressed against her side and 4 of the younger wolves in a ring around them, and she looked up and said, "I think they're having a meeting and I'm not sure of the agenda." And the laugh that came out of me was the kind that lives in the chest, that comes from somewhere old and warm. It is the evening she told me. In the careful, quiet way she said things that mattered about the years in Thornville. Not everything, she may never tell me everything, and I will not ask, but the shape of it. The early understanding that her face was her value, and that her value was her danger because things of value get traded. The woman who taught her the old script, who had seen something in her that was worth teaching. The years of making herself very small and very still and very patient, waiting for something she had not been able to name. "What were you waiting for?" I asked. She thought about it for a long time. "I didn't know," she said. "I think I had given up on being able to name it. I just knew it wasn't any of the things I'd been offered." I looked at her. "Is this it?" She looked back at me, and the stillness in her face was not the old stillness, the defensive one, the endurance one. It was the stillness of a place that has stopped bracing for wind. "Yes," she said. "I think this is it." The winter that came to Draenmore that year was the long kind, the kind that sets in early and stays past its welcome, and Ashenvale was cold and gray and largely cut off from the northern passes for 10 weeks running. The pack was restless. The correspondence was difficult. The heating in half the keep's corridors was inadequate in a way that had gone unaddressed for years because no one had wanted to admit it. We addressed it. This was, it turned out, Eloin's strong suit in ways I could not have anticipated. She walked every corridor in the keep, in the first 3 weeks of the cold, with a thoroughness that put my household steward to shame, and came back with a list of 37 specific failures in the heating and structural arrangements of Ashenvale that she had set out in clear, ordered handwriting in her leather notebook. She presented this to me with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who has always noticed everything and has never before been given leave to say so. 37, I said. "I may have missed some in the lower east passage," she said. "The smoke was obscuring some of the ceiling joins." I looked at the list. It was meticulous. It was devastating. "How long have you been working on this?" "Since the second week," she said. I wasn't going to say anything, but then the outer kitchen hearth failed and the kitchen staff were cold, and I thought, she stopped. I thought someone should say something. "You thought you should say something?" I said. She met my eyes. "Yes," she said, "I thought I should." I called a full meeting with the builders the next morning. The kitchen hearth was repaired in 3 days. The rest of the list was addressed over the following 6 weeks, and Ashenvale Keep, which had been drafty and inconsistent in its warmth for as long as anyone could remember, became genuinely, reliably warm for the first time in a generation. The household staff said so, with the grateful specificity of people who had been cold for a long time and were now warm. Old Wren told Eloin directly, in the corridor outside the North Library, that the improvement was entirely to her credit, and she looked at him for a moment with something in her face that I had learned to recognize, the expression she wore when she had been given something she was still learning to accept. "Thank you," she said to Old Wren very quietly. "The keep thanks you," he said. "My Alpha King thanks you. We have all been cold for a long time." He bowed to her, not the deep, formal bow of ceremony, just the small, correct bow of genuine respect, from an old man who did not give it easily, and walked away. And she stood in the corridor for a moment after he was gone and looked at the wall. I did not go to her. I gave her the moment. I had learned that she needed moments sometimes, to be alone with things that mattered to her, to hold them before she was ready to share them. Later that evening in the library, she said, "Old Wren is a good man." "He is," I said. "He was my father's counselor and my grandfather's before that. He has served this keep for 50 years because he believes in it." "He believed in me," she said. "I hadn't expected that." "You should get used to it," I said. "It is going to keep happening." She looked at me. Something in her face settled, quiet and deep, like a river when the current finally slows. "I'm working on it," she said. Spring came to the Calder. The birch would put out its first leaves, pale and tentative in the early light, the way the birches always began, as though they were asking permission before committing to green. The river ran high with the snowmelt from the Draenmore hills, cold and fast and bright, and the wolves ran the eastern bank in the mornings, Cree among them, gray and easy, and Eloin stood at the rebuilt window in the North Library and watched them go. I stood beside her. The keep was warm, the correspondence was orderly. Brennan of Thornville had written, in the spring's first letter, a careful and correct note of congratulation in which he referred to Eloin as the Luna of Draenmore without any qualification. which meant that the understanding had settled across the northern packs, as settled things eventually do. Not with drama, simply with the weight of what was true. Korath had requested a trade meeting in early summer. I had replied that I looked forward to it, and that my Luna would be present, and that I expected the discussion to be substantive. "You put my name in the letter," Elowen said. She had read the draft. "You'll have opinions about the trade terms," I said. "I expect them to be accurate." She looked at the letter for a moment. "What if Korath doesn't?" "Korath will manage," I said. "Korath has always managed. And if Korath finds it unexpectedly difficult to negotiate with someone who reads the old histories and has a list of 37 structural failures ready before anyone else has noticed a problem, that is an educational experience Korath will benefit from." The almost smile, the real one now I knew the difference, had known it for months. "You make it sound straightforward." "It is straightforward," I said. "You are my Luna. You are not a prize, and you are not a gift, and you are not a token, and anyone who sits across a table from you is going to understand that before the meeting ends. I have every confidence." She looked at me. "I'm still learning," she said quietly. "To believe things will stay, to let myself," she paused, "to want things without flinching." "I know," I said. "I'm not rushing it." "The window," she said, suddenly looking back at the rebuilt wall, the southwest-facing light. "When they rebuilt it, I stood here the first afternoon it let in the sun, and I thought, this is mine. Not because it was given to me, but because—" She stopped and looked at her hands. "I have never thought that about a room before, or a place." "Ashenvale is yours," I said. "The keep is yours, the North Library, the East Passage, the path by the river, yours, Cree and the pack, yours." I looked at her, and I said the rest of it simply because it was true and she needed to hear it, and I was done waiting to say it. "I am yours. This is not a transaction, and it is not an arrangement. It is a bond, and you are my mate, and I would dismantle every wall in this keep and rebuild it better before I would see you go cold or unseen or given away." Elowen looked at me for a long time. Then she stepped forward and put her arms around me simply, without ceremony, and I held her. And the Calder ran silver below the window, and the birch wood was going green, and my wolf was at rest. She said, her voice low and warm against my shoulder, "I think I'm beginning to believe you." "Good," I said. "Take all the time you need." Outside, Cree barked once, sharp, decisive, the bark she used when she had decided something, and the pack answered, and the spring light poured through the window Elowen had asked for, and I held my fated mate in the warm keep she had made warmer, in the home she was learning was hers, and I thought, she has been seen. She has been here all this time, all her life, waiting to be seen. And she is seen now. She is seen, and she is staying, and the rest of the world can learn to understand that, or it can try its luck explaining itself to Elowen. I thought, given what I knew of her, the world would find it easier to learn.